Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Breachside Broadcast, home of the finest voxcasting either side of the breach. Zoraida the Swamp Hag is one of the most powerful and canny beings in Malifaux. Just finding the way to her hut is a difficult task fraught with peril, and those who do reach her often pay a high price for her help. When you visit Zoraida, it is best to come prepared. I hope you enjoyed part 1 of Nothing Is Forever, right after this word from our sponsor.
This episode of the Breachside Broadcast is brought to you by Boots Cast Iron Pans. Our pans are ugly, awkward, and they weigh a ton, but they're indestructible and can fry up a mean breakfast of bacon and eggs. In a pinch, they often double as effective bludgeoning weapons. Just be careful to re-season them after you're done.
Nothing's Forever by Matthew Majorican. I'll have as much blood as you by the time we reach her, Mikhail shouted after swatting at a mosquito nearly the size of his hand. For once, something else wants you around and yet you fight it off, came Jedza's retort. The night was muggier than usual, and the bayou had brought out its insects by the swarm. Every step through the accursed marshland was like walking through a tar pit. Mikhail could no longer tell what was sweat and what was bog water. There was already thick muck to fight through, alongside ankle-grabbing roots and slithering amphibious predators, just waiting for an unaware foot to step into their sinkhole. The overpowering smell of rotting vegetation was a perfect, final insult to the horrible evening. Ahead, he heard the squelch of mud, followed by expletives in a few languages grumbled into the humid air. "What is it, Starushka?" Mikhail asked. Despite the weather, he couldn't keep the slightest bit of a smile from his face. "Did the mud steal one of your feet?" In response, a gloved hand dismissively waved back at him. "Watch your tongue, or I will make sure the old hag takes it," Jedza scowled. Her voice was like a stone worn down over the centuries. Even from a few yards away, Jedza cast a curious silhouette. She was covered from head to shoe in layer after layer of clothes and scarves, with a traveller's pack taller than her resting comfortably on her back. Sophie, the only being always able to keep up with Jedza, happily lumbered beside her. The skeletal auroch carried saddlebags and blankets piled high on her back. She didn't seem burdened in the slightest. Little bells swung on her horns, and ribs rang softly with every step, and the lanterns hung from her ribs clattered while they lit the way into the marshy bayou. The tied-up bundle slung across her back had stopped cursing at them long ago. After hours of travel, the unwilling occupant simply gave up, too exhausted to keep protesting. Mikhail nudged the large bag and was rewarded with a low groan. Satisfied with the response, but not the situation, he stopped to swat at another insect. After a few unsuccessful attempts, Mikhail managed to land a swift slap, crushing it with a bloody splat between both hands. He grimaced. Sometimes he envied his companions, deathless as they were. No skin or blood for the annoying bastards to feed on. Mikhail wiped the smashed bug on his coat and sighed. Jedza and Sophie had already walked several yards ahead by the time Mikhail had finished his musing. He hurried through the sludge as best he could to catch up. "Are you sure there isn't an easier way?" Mikhail asked, peering out from under his sweat-soaked hair. "Yet, there is only one way." Jedza continued walking. Maybe next time she can come to us. Maybe you should ask her, Jedza responded, deceptively passive. Mikhail shifted the sword across his back and squeezed parts of his coat to drain it of bog water. He looked forward to removing the grime from his boots in the morning. They were old and well worn, but he maintained them as though they were an heirloom. His coat was similarly aged, a gift from Jedza during their first winter together. Mikhail argued that he didn't need anything of such quality, but she assured him that it would keep him warm, and he could toss it aside in the spring if he disliked it that much. More than 30 springs later, the coat was as much a part of who he was as the sword on his back. There were a few rips and bloodstains that even a washboard couldn't get out, but he valued the memories it held, more than he hated how much it stuck to him in the humidity. Come, the evening is already here, and it is not wise to be in this place when the sun sets, Jedza said, not unkindly. Mikhail silently agreed. Unnatural things always seemed to gravitate towards Jedza, and some were hungrier than others. They had gone maybe a half-mile more when Jedza spoke again. You must tell me when you get tired, she said. I do not mean to forget. The words were quiet, almost soft. Mikhail shook his head, chuckling. I am fine, so long as you do not let the witch cast a hex on me. Maybe I should let her turn you into a frog. It would finally get me some peace and quiet. By the time they approached the hut, Mikhail was covered in mud up to his knees, exhausted. Even after so many visits to the witch's home, he wasn't sure that he could find it without Jedza as a guide. It looked the same as it always did, perched atop little stilts that seemed to buckle and bow under its weight. A soft light emerged from the windows and gaps in the walls. Puff toads and glowbugs occupied the space around the hut, making an eerie cacophony of raspy croaks and pulsing lights. Jedza nudged Mikhail's arm. Look, your new family, she chided, pointing at the toads. Mikhail decided to change the subject. Should we? He asked, gesturing to the bag thrown across the auroch. Jedza shook her head. He will not go anywhere. Stay here, Sophie, Jedza said, stroking the auroch's skull. We will be back soon. We? Mikhail asked. His eyes darted to Sophie, as though he was expecting the auroch to speak up and defend him. Sophie was more interested in a tiny snap-toothed creeper that was biting ineffectively at the skeletal teeth trying to eat it. Jedza looked up at him, bracelets clinking as she adjusted her pack. Da. Or would you like to stay with the alligators? Something heavy splashed around nearby, sending up a plume of brackish water. A gurgling shriek followed. Mikhail imagined Jedza lifting an eyebrow as she cocked her veiled head at him. Jedza's hand stopped mid-knock when the hut's door creaked open on uneven hinges. There, low on the floor and peeking out from behind the door, was a small voodoo doll with large button eyes and a stitched, lopsided grin. It struggled for a moment before pushing the door open enough for the two of them to enter, waving them in with a flourish. As they walked past the strange puppet, it began to struggle again. Mikhail gave the door a tiny nudge to help the voodoo doll along. Zoraida had drawn an intricate symbol in chalk on the floor of the hut. Knickknacks and curios were scattered everywhere. A bottle of moonshine sat nearby, along with a variety of cloudy jars filled with things only the swamp witch could identify. Dried plants hung from beams supporting the hut, along with a multitude of strange bottles, urns, and books stacked on stained tables. Shelves filled with puppets and voodoo dolls that stared blankly, as though they were watching for intruders. A cauldron dominated the room. It lazily bubbled over a small fire. Zoraida mumbled to herself, briefly rubbing the bags under her eyes. The dead toad in her grip had started to twitch and kick. She turned, puff toad squirming in between her knobby knuckles. In the doorway was a bundle of rags shaped roughly like a woman. A larger man stood behind her, avoiding the witch's gaze. Though Zoraida knew Jedza's eyes were long gone, the witch could almost see a sparkle behind the veil. "Did you miss me?" Jedza asked, slowly making her way into the hut. "Miss you? I miss my clean floor. You gonna clean this up?" Zoraida snapped, giving Mikhail a dark look, which the man did not meet. She swore as the toad slipped from her grip and started hopping around, leaving its insides behind. "Now that is no way to greet an old friend," Jedza interjected, crossing her arms. "We can agree on that. You are old. You make him look like he was just born yesterday," Zoraida snorted, jerking a thumb at Mikhail. Jedza adjusted the pince-nez on her veil. "Have you seen yourself lately? I'm sure you have a mirror somewhere in all this mess." Zoraida chuckled, then picked up the toad's still-breathing lungs and tossed them into the cauldron. She turned and waited for Jedza to shrug off her pack before the two embraced. After a moment, both sat down at the nearby table. There were only 2 chairs, so Mikhail simply leaned against the doorframe. The swamp witch eyed him, but turned her attention to Jedza. "So what brings you here this time? Finally gonna let me jar and pickle him?" Zoraida asked, watching the bubbles slowly burst on the surface of her cauldron. "Can I not be here just to enjoy your company? You only come here when you need something, and you always bring trouble with you," Zoraida said sarcastically. "Tea?" Mikhail appeared to stiffen when she realized the question was directed at him. "Da, that would be nice," Mikhail said. "Made a whole pot of it." Zoraida either didn't notice the green pallor that came over his face, or just didn't care. She gave him a toothy, wicked grin before standing. Joints clicking, the old woman hovered in front of her cauldron for a moment, savoring the apprehension from Mikhail, before reaching down and retrieving a small kettle that had been steaming on the coals beneath. "To your health," Zoraida said, pouring the tea into a pair of cups, until both were filled with pungent, watery brew. "Za zdrovya," he said flatly, raising his tea and draining it in one go. He placed the empty cup back down on the table with a grimace. The witch downed a good portion of her own. Jedza was uncharacteristically quiet during the toast. She absently fiddled with something in one hand. "What's that you've got there?" Zoraida asked, settling noisily back down into her chair. Jedza lifted a large coin and tossed it onto the table. Its golden face shimmered, even in the dim light of the hut. "As if you did not already know." "I do, but I don't know why you're fidgeting." "Gretchen," she finally called her favor in. "I do not like the job, or the fact that she is sending people along with me. Some lawman and his Malishka. You know how manipulative that Vedma is. She is all great machines and old gods. She does not understand stirring up the past can cause trouble." Zoraida sipped her tea and squinted at her old friend. "What she got on the lawman? I thought he'd be one to avoid her claws." Jedza shrugged. "She did not share, and I did not ask. I was too irritated. I have Mikhail. It has been centuries since I've needed to rely on any other. It does not sit well." Zoraida finished her drink. She grabbed Mikhail's empty cup and stared at the leaves in the bottom. She poked at them with a gnarled finger and made a small noise of surprise before setting it back down. Mikhail narrowed his eyes in concern, but Zoraida ignored him and peered at Jedza. "Look at it as a debt no longer owed." Jedza nodded. You are lucky to be done with her." She watched through her veil as Zoraida chuckled, leaning back in her chair. "Doesn't seem like it. What do you want?" Irritation crept into the hag's voice. She already knew the answer, but just needed to hear it come from Jedza. A thread. Zoraida scanned Jedza with one rheumy eye. "You're playing a dangerous game." "If I thought there was another way, I would not be here." Jedza held Zoraida's gaze while the old witch leaned back in her chair. "I know you can do it. You know there's a cost. Zoraida gave a sideways glance toward Mikhail. Is that why you brought him inside this time? Niet, Jedza retorted quickly. We brought our own. Zoraida's sunken eyes flashed with excitement as she stroked her pointed chin. Interesting. Didn't think you had it in you. Jedza shrugged. It is someone who will not be missed. But that does not answer my question, she continued. Will you do it? A favor given is a favor owed, Zoraida said ominously. A deep sigh came from Jedza's robes. Another debt. I imagine I will be dead before all of them are paid. Stop your whining. It's not like I'm asking you to kill anybody, Zoraida snorted. Her voice dropped slightly as she pointed a crooked finger. I know what you're going after, and I want you to ask it a question. You agree to come right back here and tell me what it says, and I'll get you that thread. Let the lawman handle the rest. Deal? It is a deal, Jedza agreed. With the arrangement made, Mikhail left the hut to retrieve the gift Jedza had insisted they bring along for Zoraida. The two women sat in silence, the moment quickly broken by Sophie's bells rattling and a fresh stream of muffled curses. The steps to the hut groaned again, and Mikhail re-entered, the wrapped bundle across one broad shoulder. On the floor, he asked, indicating the chalk outline drawn there. Zoraida rubbed her hands together. The center. Mikhail heaved the struggling burlap sack. It landed hard. Mikhail cautiously avoided touching any part of the chalk circle as he stepped back. Convenient of you to have that drawn up before we got here, Jedza mused, while Zoraida undid a knot at the end of the bag. Anything to get you out of here faster, the swamp witch huffed. Now who did you bring me? She finally got the rope undone and peeled away part of the bag to reveal a filthy, gagged man, red-faced and streaked with sweat. Ooh, Zoraida exclaimed, bending to get a closer look. You were right. Nobody will miss him. She poked the man's face with a dirty fingernail. Yes, he'll do just fine. The bound man snarled and continued to try and fight his way out of the burlap. Zoraida rolled her eyes. She made an arthritic gesture, barely any effort on her part, and the man seized up. Jedza turned to Mikhail. Wait outside. I will not be long. Mikhail quietly made for the door, dodging the odd little puppet that seemed determined to follow him about. Zoraida chuckled as she placed a few jars on the ground next to the doomed man. What makes you think you can stay for the fun? Can't pull a thread if the dead won't die, she said to Jedza. That old willow out front should be far enough, I reckon. Now, where'd those pins and needles get off to? Jedza stood and picked up her pack. The hut floor groaned as she made her way out the door. Legless newts and eyeballs watched her go from their jars. They scrabbled in the cloudy, liquid prisons for a moment, but eventually fell still again. You'll know when we're done, Zoraida cackled, voice carrying out into the bayou night. The lights leaking out from the cracks and windows of the hovel winked out one by one. Mikhail followed Jedza, who led Sophie towards a heavy willow tree a few yards from the hut. They both tried to ignore the screams and crunches, like cracking eggs sizzling over a fire, that echoed out across the bayou. Far away from the sodden bayou, on the dusty hardpan of the Badlands, 2 eggs joined a slab of bacon over a small frying pan and began to cook. Cornelius Bass adjusted the pan over his small campfire, which mimicked the others his frontiersmen had made to fend off the oncoming dusk. A larger man took a swig from a canteen, his metal hands reflecting the dim firelight. All I'm saying is you need to watch what you say around these folks, Jonathan Reichardt grunted. Can't be too careful with them. Across the fire, Bernadette Bass's posture was almost a mirror of her father's, tired but enduring. Look at you, she chided, A big old executioner scared of a few grouchy fossils. A look from her father made Bernadette turn her attention to the egg sizzling over the fire. She poked it with a stick. If I've learned anything from the guild, it's that you need to watch out for paper pushers over gunslingers, Rykard shot back. I know what they can get people into. You getting called up doesn't sit right. Especially since we still have a lot of work to do out here. The executioner looked over at Cornelius, who hadn't moved. Don't need to worry about that, Cornelius responded calmly. Just take care of the folks in Dust Point for a few weeks. It's nothing you don't know how to handle. Rykard grumbled. Even so. He eyed the long suitcase next to him. A shotgun deals with a sandworm better than these claws do. We haven't seen a worm out here in weeks, Bernadette said. Cornelius grunted in agreement. True. Cornelius paused for a moment before looking up at Rykard. These frontier folk are still people, John. Hard-working. They want to feel safe like everyone else. I trust you can make the right calls till we get back. The sheriff's tone didn't offer any argument. Rykard sighed deeply. Fine. I'll make sure nobody steals pies from any windowsills. With that, the big man pushed himself to his feet and made for his tent, suitcase in hand. Just be careful, Bass. Once he was well out of earshot, Bernadette picked up the skillet and set it on the ground, picking at its eggy contents with a fork. He seems grumpier than usual. Cornelius stared into the dying campfire. Nerves. He's just being cautious. Can't blame him for being suspicious of people with power. Guild works with the society from time to time, but he's right. We do need to be careful. Bernadette pondered. So we're helping the guild? Not exactly. But isn't that why we took this job? Malifaux's a big place, B. We do what we have to do. The Basses had travelled several days north to reach their destination. An old, solitary weirdwood, a few dozen miles south of the Hollow Point pumping station. Cornelius leaned against a tree with the edge of his hat pulled down to cover his face, while Bernadette collected small sticks to keep their campfire going. The missive that Cornelius received a few weeks ago had once again found its way into his hand. He scanned it again in the last of the evening sun, trying to see if he had missed any information about their assignment. Sheriff Cornelius Bass. Your reputation of integrity, honesty, and capability in the field precedes you. As such, we were pleased to hear you have decided to accept our mutually beneficial arrangement. Thusly, you will be cooperating with another member of our society and her retinue. You are not to interfere with her process. Simply provide protection and ensure any items of interest are directly returned to the society manor. You will be properly rewarded and compensated upon successful completion of this task. Please find enclosed the necessary maps and additional information for this venture. Signed, L. von Clausewitz. P.S. To avoid any unfortunate miscommunications or errors, we give this advice beforehand. Don't judge, don't shoot, and don't stare. Don't stare? What did that even mean? When he saw them walking toward the weirdwood tree a few hours later, he knew. The auroch the society had identified as her pack animal was taller than he was, and loaded with boxes and bags. But that wasn't what really caught his eye. The fact that it was an animate skeleton, walking along like it didn't have a care in the world, seemed worth mentioning. Somehow the Explorer Society hadn't thought so. Cornelius nudged Bernadette, who was absent-mindedly carving a stick. What is that? Bernadette asked, tossing the stick aside and squinting. Our companions, her father replied. So Rykard was right. Don't trust them. Why? Because they're clearly necromancers? Cornelius raised an eyebrow. So you can judge without speaking to them first. It's a skeleton. They gotta be rezzers. Cornelius held his tongue, staring at Bernadette until she shifted uncomfortably. Fine, I'll wait. But at least now I get the warning. Bernadette watched as the group came closer. One of the figures stood out amongst the others. She appeared thin, almost frail, but a huge pack stuffed with what looked like scrolls sat on her back without a problem. She held an umbrella over her hooded head, despite there being no rain. Small trinkets, or what Bernadette guessed were bracelets and jewelry, decorated her neck and wrists. The large man beside her looked to be a decade or two past middle age and weather-beaten. Despite this, he seemed capable and dangerous. His beard and hair were long, both tied with golden bands. A heavy coat rested around his shoulders. A huge sword was visible on his back. The weight didn't appear to slow him down in the least. As the three approached, Bernadette felt her nerves tingle. She looked up at her father. He bore the same stoic expression he always did. Bernadette took a deep breath and set herself the same way. The curious group stopped a few yards from the Basses. Nobody moved for a few moments, until the bearded man gently nudged his veiled companion. He said something in a low voice, before the woman stiffly thrust out a hand. "I am Jedza. This is Mikhail and Sophie. You are the ones who were directed to accompany us." She waited. "Go on, B," Cornelius said quietly. A pained look came over Bernadette's face as she silently pleaded with her father to take the lead, but the lawman didn't move. Knowing that fighting was pointless, she squared her shoulders and reached out to shake Jedza's proffered hand. "Bernadette Bass, Mom. Nice to, make your acquaintance." Surprisingly, Bernadette's voice didn't break when she felt the skinless bones held inside the glove. "Bernadette, it is a pleasure." "And this is my father, Cornelius," Bernadette continued. Cornelius tipped his hat to Jedza and Mikhail. "We'll rest here tonight and set off tomorrow, if that's all right with everyone." He shot a look at the Auroch, who had candle wax dripping into an empty eye socket. "You do rest, right?" "Everyone rests," Jedza replied cryptically. "I suppose so," the lawman said, inviting the newcomers to gather around their fire. "Should we talk about the mission? I'd like to know what you need from us." Cornelius watched Sophie meander about, though she stayed close to Jedza. The old woman had yet to take a seat. "Da, it is a simple job. It should not keep you for more than a few days. We go, we ask questions, we get what we need, we return." Bernadette seemed puzzled. "Only a few days? Guess this will be easier than we thought." She ignored her father's glare, but he secretly felt the same. "You are here because Gretchen needed someone living and trustworthy. That is rare in Malifaux. The second part, that is." Jedza watched Bernadette grow uncomfortable at the mention of living. "So you are Rezes," Bernadette blurted. Cornelius hadn't moved, but his shotgun was within arm's reach. To their surprise, Jedza laughed, shaking her head. "No, I am not a necromancer. Where we are going, my condition does not allow me to easily go. There are some places only I can safely travel, but there are others where things must stay dead." "Do you understand?" Jedza asked. Bernadette slowly frowned. "No." "Do not worry. In time you will." "No one ever does at first. It is no matter. Let us eat," Mikhail interrupted, walking to Sophie and retrieving several bags filled with vegetables, dried meat, and utensils. He placed a small pot over the fire and filled it with water from a jug. A chunk of soup bone followed. When that was done, he took the sword from his back and placed it carefully next to his bags. "You've any bread to break?" Mikhail asked. Cornelius considered, pulling up his own bundle. He unwrapped it. Hard bread, a chunk of cheese, strips of jerky, some ground coffee, and a few handfuls of berries. "That work?" he asked. "With this I make a feast," Mikhail exclaimed, trying to put everyone at ease. Did you travel far? So out of the way this place is. He spent the next few minutes slicing vegetables and talking to Cornelius, whose short answers punctuated Mikhail's throwing more ingredients into the pot. Both continued talking while the soup came along, though the swordsman seemed more excited about the prospect of cheese and bread than anything. Jedza continued to stand, albeit with the overlarge haversack still clinging to her shoulders. Cornelius nudged Bernadette. Mikhail had already sat down, and Bernadette perked up when she realized what her father meant. "Can I take your pack for you?" Bernadette offered. Jedza chortled, pulling the fabric taut around her jaw as she waved off the younger woman. "You can try, but I'm not sure all of us together could carry that thing," Mikhail explained. Mikhail is right. Jedza slipped one of the straps off her shoulder. She let the pack down, the heft of it kicking up a small dust cloud. Bernadette watched as the dust settled around the bag. "Just what have you got in that thing?" The warmth in Jedza's voice was evident. "A bit of this and a little of that. Things I've collected over the years, mostly. Curiosities." "You got a deck of cards in there? Maybe we can get a game of Hold'em in before dinner's ready." "Ah, card games. I prefer Nine Men's Morris or Majau. We could play them if Mikhail had not lost the pieces." Jedza began rummaging. Sophie settled down nearby with a clatter of bones and bells. A few packs of playing cards landed near Bernadette, one after the other. "Maybe a full deck if you mix them all together. I do not know. Keep them." Bernadette picked the cards up, slowly shuffling through them. One of the decks had numbers and suits she didn't recognize, and another was just tarot cards. "What else you got in there?" she ventured. "One question with too many answers," Mikhail smiled. "Da, you are full of questions. Come, let me show you." Jedza began digging through her pack again. She pulled out an armful of scrolls, followed by a cast-iron frying pan, 3 yards of purple silk, and an ornately carved lens of crystal that she rewrapped in the silk and carefully leaned against a growing pile of knickknacks. She almost climbed into the bag head first to dig through the deep within. Cornelius looked at Mikhail and the growing pile of trinkets and baubles that Jedza set aside after briefly explaining what they were. "Does she do this a lot?" he asked. "More than you know," Mikhail chided. After sitting back down, he picked up the large blade lying next to him. Baz tensed for a moment, but relaxed when Mikhail pulled out a whetstone, rag and oil from a pocket, seemingly some of the only things the man actually carried, and set to work sharpening the blade. "That must take all night," Cornelius commented. "A good tool can stay with you forever as long as you treat it right," Mikhail said, focused on the sword's edge. "Give me 4 hours to cut down a tree, and I will spend 3 sharpening my axe." Baz exhaled. That was a sentiment he could agree with. He watched until the soup began to bubble. He cleared his throat, which caught Mikhail's eye. "Mind if I—" he asked, indicating to the fire. "No, please, help yourself," Mikhail said happily. "It is good to break bread with new friends." While Cornelius ladled soup, Jedza started repacking the piles of items back into her pack. She grabbed a small bundle, and Bernadette expelled the tiniest sound in protest and immediately flushed red. Jedza didn't seem to mind. The old traveler had stopped and was examining the collection she held. A few bright red sticks of licorice sat atop her jumbled batch of things. "I do not have much use for sweets. Sometimes I forget what I carry," Jedza said, handing the bundle of slightly linty candy to Bernadette. The Basses shared a moment of unspoken debate before Bernadette reached out and took the licorice. "I haven't had good licorice since we came through the breach. Thank you," she said, offering one to her father. The lawman seemed to debate with himself for a moment, and then took one. "After dinner." Bernadette rolled her eyes, but put the tempting licorice to the side. "Fine, fine. Jedza finished packing and sat down by the fire, looking quite pleased with herself. Sophie allowed Jedza to rub her skull. Mikhail and the Basses relished their food, but Cornelius noticed that Jedza wasn't eating. He made no comment, but kept watching the strange woman. She sat very still, staring back. "Where do you come from?" Jedza's sudden question broke the sounds of spoons hitting bowls. Bernadette glanced at her father, gaining a silent permission. "The Badlands, probably, but we move around," Bernadette started. "I do not mean here. I mean, where do you come from? On Earth." Mikhail turned and gave Jedza a look, but she waved him away. He returned to his soupy potatoes and leeks. "Oklahoma," Cornelius said slowly. "America. Ah, the land of the free, yes? I have been there once or twice, but not as you know it. Why are you here?" Bernadette cleared her throat. "Well," her father interjected, "we have to be here." "As must we all," Jedza replied, nodding. "And here? Where did you say home was?" "The Badlands, I guess." "Far southwest," Bernadette pointed in the rough direction. "It's dry, dusty, nothing green for miles, just dirt and clay. It's not for everyone, but we're tough." Bernadette seemed to swell with pride. "We've traveled all over and helped keep the peace. But yeah," she finished, "it's dusty." Only the crackling fire made any noise for a while. Some crickets joined in occasionally. The society was light on details. "Where are we going exactly?" Cornelius asked, setting his empty bowl down. "An old place that is far away from here. Northwest," Jedza said, pointing out the direction with her chin. "Far away? I thought you said it was only a few days," Bernadette questioned. "Da. We will find our way quicker than you think," Jedza replied. "Some of the greatest journeys take the least amount of time. Shall I tell you of some while you have dessert?" Bernadette mulled the proposal over, nibbling on her licorice. "All right, shoot." Jedza adjusted her scarves and leaned forward. "I have traveled many places. I have seen many things. Long ago I spoke to a man who claimed he had been across the great deserts in the east. The sand was gold beneath the sun. So hot you would think it was a great coin pulled from a furnace and flipped up into the sky." Mikhail only half listened. This was a tale he had heard many times before, and he knew how it ended. Before he drifted off, Mikhail told Cornelius to let the campfire die. Jedza would keep watch through the night. She always did.
That's it for another episode of the Breachside broadcast. Join us next time for part 2 of Nothing Is Forever.